So I'm just going to explain this again. So we have this sin cycle, or it can be called the way of the flesh, the way of death, the way of sin, the way to hell, the way down, how things get bad. I mean, you can just give a whole number of things, but I think this is something like a universal picture of the way things work. And we do things at different times, but there's kind of this latent background and this cycle that's behind these problems that we have. And so we fail to pray, we fail to have a relationship with God, whatever circumstances. This results in walking in the flesh. That walking in the flesh, that's Pauline language for being independent, for using the gifts that God has given us on our own, without communion and relationship with God. And that results in some kind of sin. Then that produces guilt. We blame
others for our guilt.
Yeah, but we blame sometimes circumstances, we blame but others and circumstances, and ultimately God. It also goes back to God, who's put us in this situation, and we're really blaming Him. And this suppresses the conscience, and then we develop a little harder heart, so we're not as sensitive to God. The whole thing is being sensitive to God, and then walking in that sensitivity, or walking in that light that we have, and that makes us aware of more light, and we grow. But all of these things have degrees of error. And I want to talk about those degrees of error. But these are considered by many of the main fathers. They're talked about there 7 or 8 or 9 major passions. Now, passion means it's a feeling accompanied with a kind of thought. There's both this kind of, it's an old person response. So there is debate, actually. There's a different way of looking at these in the East and in the West. It's in the West, Augustine and his followers in the West, mainly they look to the problem of pride up there on the top. That pride is the source of everything, of all the problems. But the Eastern Fathers, St. Maximus, and the Eastern Fathers tend to regard the sensual passions as being the bigger problem. But then Maximus says that behind it all is the love of the self. And that kind of goes along with what I'm saying here. In other words, that when we fail to worship God, then we fall into our own egocentric understanding of things. We fail to listen to others. We regard our own position as being the position, and then this results in all sorts of problems. So then I have kind of, this is my thing on the left, the different kinds of passions. The gluttony and fornication and greed are related to the love of the body. They're sensual sins. And then the wrath and sloth and depression and envy have to do a lot more, at least, with our relationships with other people. That is, we get Of course, there's relations with people down here. When I was a kid, I'd fight with my brother and sister over the largest piece of cake. That's probably gluttony, right, in its formative stages. But then when it gets up to, it's kind of a secondary thing. In other words, why do we become develop wrath or sinful anger? Because we're angry about something else here. We're fighting about something else here. I mean, mainly, I just heard this quote, that politics is war without blood, and war is politics with blood. And people say, well, war is mainly a bad way to deal with real estate problems, which is basically greed, right? We're trying to settle our territory. Who gets the territory? Who gets to run things? And so there's this wrath that happens in war, or then people get there's kind of a despair that's involved. In other words, people are down here in this area, then they end up in a kind of despair about their life. And so people become lazy. Sloth is laziness. Why do people become lazy? So, or why do they get depressed? Because they've lost a kind of confidence, or why are they envious of other people? See, in their relationships with other people, they don't have this self-acceptance. And then the response to that, you see, when they feel part of the blame, choosing to blame people and things, is an act of pride and vainglory. In other words, justifying ourselves in defiance. It becomes a kind of defiance in the face of adversity. I want to clarify empathy more. How do we understand empathy? I mean, I know the empathy is different than sympathy. Sympathy is to feel with somebody, and so somebody's in pain, and we generally think of, well, I'm sympathetic, and oh, it must hurt, and sometimes sympathy doesn't help, Sometimes you're feeling bad, and you get somebody to sympathize, and you go, oh, do they really mean it? And, it's a different thing, but empathy is somebody who comes to you with some real understanding. And that, I think, is, that's something we need to learn. I mean, to learn to do that. And I do think that families can learn it. That is, parents can learn it, and by modeling it, they teach their children to do it, and the children do it. It says in the Ten Commandments, I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. And I think this third and fourth generation, in which God shows, brings his discipline to, is partly this thing that these kind of passions become a part of a family tradition. So that, again, Hitler, the extreme, purposely developed vainglory and pride in the German nation. I just saw a thing with Jews who, because they were devoted to the fatherland, there were 100,000 people with Jewish ancestry that served in the German army
Yes.
because of their love for the fatherland. You see that, and that was, that's a pride. And fathers who have a problem with anger teach their children that way, or sloth. You have a lazy father.
You're saying father, you feel it's more father
I
representing?
don't know, I'm a father.
I'm just wondering if you feel it's more because
No, I think-
fathers
I
do
think-
have a strong role with kids.
No, I guess, I suppose that, something of what she said, that the fathers are responsible for the sons and the mothers are responsible for the daughters in a kind of a modeling way, certainly is the way it does operate. That is, but then sometimes a daughter will love the father and despise the mother. That can happen. I mean, the children, I think rebellious teenagers can be a good thing.
Oh, good there.
Because
rebellious
they can rebel against evil parents.
Oh, well.
No, but partly, think of that, if there's some things, in other words, if your behavior, you rebel against their behavior. Part of my rebellion was going to church.
Maybe you mean rebellion is put in us for that positive reason?
I think that teenagers, what happens is, this is another diagram that I do. Now I can't use my diagram. I'll do it here. I'll make a diagram here. Just saying. I think it's like this. You have this little baby born here, and here is mom and dad, and here's God. Oops, G-O-D. And God communicates to the baby through the parents totally. The child gets a little bigger, and he sees his friends here. Now they're under their parents too, but now he starts seeing a little bit other viewpoints. See? Like Alex, your daughter, starting to ask questions about what's going on in the world and how's it happening, and then they get up here and they get to be teenagers. See, if you haven't communicated to them by the time they're teenagers, now they relate almost more strongly to their peer group. Judy and I had church kids as our peer group, and they were stricter than my parents, right? My peers, when I grew up in high school, were much stricter than my parents were. My dad smoked and swore and like that, but none of my friends in high school would do that at all. You see, but then they start questioning what their parents are saying. What's going on here? What is really the case? And then they get up in college, which is notoriously a time where they get pulled in by the culture if they have spiritual parents, and they get pulled away because they're more and more independent. So there's this developing relationships of a parent with their child through the parents and in relationship to God. And so, and Don is saying, well, I experienced myself this conflict, and then now you've got to resolve this conflict, but the parents aren't going to resolve the conflict for you. It's something you've got to do. You've got to look elsewhere, and it becomes a motivating force for you to learn psychology and figure out what's going on in me that makes me like this, and you get a PhD out of the motivation. It becomes a positive motivation in a way, because you took it positively and took stewardship with it. The key thing for the Christian in that relationship is to really be, and I think this is true of parenting in general, the whole critical issue about every relationship is communication. You gotta communicate, you gotta be in communication, and it's in communication that what Tom says is the key. That's where love comes through. If you never talk to a kid, you could give them stuff and do stuff and provide stuff and let them do stuff, and that's not the love that's going to help them. The love that's going to help them is really listening to them so that you really understand them. And then understand, so they'll tell you about their struggles. So it's what I try to model in talking to you. You know how I listen to you. Am I right? And that's what you've got to do. You've got to listen. You got to listen and hear and understand. And then you're gonna help the child cope with dealing with the mother.